Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday as we continue in our midweek study in the book of Daniel. And hopefully you can see my screen right now. This is, again, a very exciting portion that we're going through. We're going to pick up on verse 36, and this is the interpretation of the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. Of course, Daniel then received the dream in form of a revelation from God and the interpretation. So here is the interpretation starting in verse 36. And we are reading from the Socino Press JPS or Jewish Bible version here. And this is the dream. We will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Notice he uses the plural of we. It's not I, Daniel, will tell. It's we. So he could be giving credit to God. He could be speaking of himself as the Jewish people. And that may play in a little bit more when we get into this next verse. So he says, we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. And then he says something very striking. He goes, Thou, O King of kings, unto whom the God of heaven hath given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. Um, I find this stopped me in my thoughts when I read this because, of course, King of Kings is something that we're very much used to reading about in a prophetic way, talking about the one true God and making reference to Jesus in his realm of ruling in the book of Revelation. So I stopped there and let's take a look at what the Jewish commentators have to say about it. Um, of course, he explains the plural of majesty for we will tell, could be I and my companions, or that the word we is used in a sense of humility before the king. But then what we were looking at here is in verse 37. The Jewish sages say King of Kings was a designation also borne by the Persian kings, which we're going to find out when we look at Ezra. In rabbinic opinion, however, regards it as an epithet of God and connects it with what follows, King of Kings, who the God of heaven hath given thee. It's kind of strange. It doesn't answer the question the way I wanted to. So let's take a look at some biblical references. Maybe first come back to the image. Of course, he's making reference to Nebuchadnezzar, who's king of Babylon. He is being referred to as the head of gold, and that may play into this understanding. So when we go to the interlinear of this verse here, we see then verse 37, Anta Malka Melech Makaya. And so the word Melech is in obviously here it's in Aramaic, but it's very similar to what we see in Hebrew. And so those are the words we want to look it up. First of all, in Ezra, because that was what was just referenced. And so this whole context of Ezra is somewhat a little different. It's talking about Artaxerxes, who is also being referred to as Melech Makaya, and this again is in Aramaic, so it uses the exact same phraseology as what Daniel did. And then we have one more that we look at in Ezekiel. And when we look at Ezekiel, we see he's making reference to Nebuchadnezzar. This is kind of interesting when you look at the time frames in which these prophets lived. Um, you will see that this is overlapping. And so the Nebuchadnezzar is being spoken about by Ezekiel because Ezekiel seems to have lived in a time concurrent with what Daniel was going through. And so, but yet you don't see them reference one another. And I think it's kind of interesting. But in deference to that, here Daniel is calling him Melech Malachim, King of Kings. So making reference to this same king. And so that really intrigues me. Looking at the New Testament, we see here in First Timothy that Paul talks to Timothy and says that Jesus is going to come and he will be the only potentate, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So this is where this mystery is why are they referring to Nebuchadnezzar in such a way and Artaxerxes in such a way that is normally reserved for God? Looking a little bit further, we see in Revelation chapter 17, verse 14, here John is also giving Jesus the title of Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And then when we go to Revelation, verse 19, or chapter 19, verse 16, we see that not only is John using these words to describe Jesus like he did in chapter 17, but it is written on his thigh, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So this is where, to me, this gets very, very interesting. And what I've noticed, and maybe this leads a little something into this, is Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold. So his kingdom is being spoken about in a very positive way. And let's go back to the Jewish commentary here. It makes it a little easier to read the English as it's flows together nicely. And that he makes reference to how great Nebuchadnezzar is. So why is he saying this? I think what we will notice as we continue to look at the different kingdoms that are coming, the head of gold, they treated the Jewish people in a better way. Um, yes, he was ruling over them. Yes, he had taken them in captivity, but they were given freedoms and they were brought into the realm of ruling the kingdom, as we see here with Daniel. And so they were treated fairly well. And maybe this is the reason that this title is allowed to be somewhat applied to them. I find it kind of strange. I don't like seeing it. I'm questioning it and wondering why this title that's normally given to God is here applied to Nebuchadnezzar, who is a pagan king. Yes, he's being used by God. Yes, he's treating the Jewish people favorably. He's sustaining them. The next kingdoms that come are going to be more brutal. They're going to treat the Jewish people less fairly and all of their subjects less fairly. And so this is just a strange thing. And I struggle to get a good understanding of why Daniel, Ezekiel, and Ezra would refer to these pagan kings in a way. We can also look at it not from such a spiritual way, but maybe from a natural way. And maybe he's just saying he is the greatest king that exists right now, as far as they know, as far as the kingdoms they understand. He rules the world as they knew it or know it. And so he is just giving this superlative to this King Nebuchadnezzar and King Artaxerxes. If that's the case, well, then maybe that fits into the title given to Jesus later on, because he is conquering in the book of Revelation all of the kingdoms that exist upon the earth and will, at the end, ultimately be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So you can look at it in the spiritual realm and it doesn't seem right, but if you look at it in maybe a natural realm of just power and authority, then from Daniel's point of view, maybe I can understand that. So that's where we're going to maybe leave that right now, and let you think about it as I will. So verse 38, it says that this king, Nebuchadnezzar, was given authority over the beasts of the field, the fowls of the heaven, all of the land that he dwells in was given into his hand, and you will rule over them. You are the head of gold. Now, I thought this terminology was kind of interesting as he makes reference to beasts of the field and fowls of the heaven, because we will see later on that Nebuchadnezzar doesn't do such good things coming up. He exalts himself and he neglects to give the glory unto the God of heaven, the true King of kings and Lord of lords. And Nebuchadnezzar messes up, and God pronounces a judgment upon him to where he has a temporary bit of insanity, has a temporary lapse of his cognitive features. And this, as the story goes, he runs out into the wilderness and dwells out there for a couple of years. And the way they describe him when he comes back has some very similar words that he lived as the beast of the field, that his hair grew out and became like feathers over him. So there's kind of a parallelism of, okay, king, you were given authority over all these beasts of the field and birds of the heaven, as long as you recognized your proper place in God's realm. But once you got out of your proper place, once you exalted yourself, now you've become just like those beasts of the field and birds of the heaven that you were given um, the lordship over. So a little bit of irony, poetic justice, if you will, parallelism, however you wish to phrase it. We'll see that come up. And so this was the head of gold. Again, a king that everybody seemed to like, even though he was very fickle. He was going to slay them all. They seemed happy living in Babylon. Um, Later on, they will come out of Babylon, but God chose this king to rule over them and sustain them. It's very similar to, I think, when the Israelites went into Egypt. Pharaoh was chosen, and Joseph was there to be used by God to protect the Israelites and to shelter them and sustain them. And for whatever reason, this seems to have some parallelism to that also. So as we move on, we get to verse 39, and um, and after that shall arise another kingdom inferior to you. We know that it is silver. It doesn't make any reference here, but it is inferior. It will, as we go back and look at our image, we're going to see that that is the Medes and the Persians represented as silver. That conquering will come in here in Daniel when we get to the handwriting on the wall and the king again, Nebuchadnezzar messes up and he is conquered by the Medes and the Persians, but they again are a inferior kingdom, maybe because how they're treating the Jewish people, maybe it's how they're treating things, but there's a decline. And then from there comes the middle section of brass and bronze, and that is attributed to Greece. Greece, the Grecian Empire, when Alexander the Great conquers Persia. And after that, we get to the legs of iron, which are of Rome. And as you can see, the Grecian Empire, maybe they weren't so brutal in what they had done physically to the people, but they introduced a culture and a philosophy that had very detrimental effects upon the spirituality of the Jewish people, of the Greek mythology, of the types of government that they were introducing, and just great influence upon the culture by the Greeks. The Romans then conquered them, which are the legs of iron. Of course, they ruled with an iron fist, very brutal, very harsh, a lot of slavery, a lot of just indentured servitude, treated the Jews somewhat okay, but later on conquered the Jews and destroyed Jerusalem, decimated the temple, and of course were very, very horrible in that situation. And then, of course, the mixture of the feet of iron and clay. A lot of speculation on what this is. This is a site that this picture comes from a different version of Christianity, says this is the United States, Anglo-American. Others will say it's the Roman Empire in a spiritual form. Again, lots of speculation there. So going back to the verses here, talks about this fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron and breaks all things. And then it goes into a lot of discussion about the feet and the mixture of the clay and the iron. And that's where all of this becomes very interesting. because this is the age we are thought to live in today. And it is something where there's a lot of time spent on it. Is this for our benefit? We look at the Jewish commentators. Of course, they don't see the Christian age, they don't see the Christian church. They're looking at it from a standpoint of the Jewish people, and it's very unclear for them. And so, as we continue this long discussion of what iron and clay mixed together is, there's a lot of symbolism here. And I think the importance is just knowing that this is unstable. This is not something that's going to have strength. We're living in a very unstable world. Everything is topsy-turvy right now, things going on in every country, in the ones that aren't at war, the ones that are at war, definitely can fit in with this iron and clay. It's not gelling, not mixing together, not providing any base of stability. The whole world is in a very uncertain time right now. And so that's, as some would interpret this to be referencing the time we're living in right now. And then, of course, as we get to verse 44, and we're going to be stopping at 45 today, it says, those days the kings, God shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And this kingdom will be, they'll break in pieces, consume all these other kingdoms. And what's going to happen here in verse 45 is that a stone which was cut out of the mountain that we talked about earlier without hands is going to come down and fall on the feet and break them. And then God is going to set up his kingdom. And this is referenced in Revelation when Jesus comes back again and sets up his kingdom. So all of this is so fascinating. And this stone made without hands, I think of the reference that Jesus made about the stone that was rejected becomes the head of the corner, or the cornerstone, becomes the foundation whereby the church is built upon. And so Christianity will, of course, interpret this and look at it much different than Judaism would, trying to show you both sides of it and see that with prophecy, there's a lot of interpretation. You do any searching in the internet, you Google different teachers, you're going to find a lot of speculation. What we can just safely say is we live in turbulent times. We live in times of uncertainty. This is biblically prophesied, which I believe this supports that. But we do know when we see these things happening, it's not time for us to become fearful and pull away. It's time for us to look up. It's time for us to support one another. It's time for us to pray for our world and one another, and that God would open our eyes, open our hearts, and draw us all closer to him and comfort us and be with us during this time before he comes again. So, hope you enjoyed this study today. God bless you as you continue to study, and I appreciate you so much taking the time to listen, and look forward to sharing with you next week. Bye-bye.